Hello there.
This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to an incredibly special episode of Coffee with Kenobi. This is one of the most thrilling podcast episodes I've ever had the privilege of being a part of. On today's Coffee with Kenobi special release, I got to speak with Ewan McGregor, Obi-Wan Kenobi himself. Even saying that out loud gives me incredible goosebumps because I get to share it with all of you. An incredible thrill and opportunity. Much more on that later. I also got to speak with Deborah Chow, who is, of course, the director and one of the heads of this incredible series, and Moses Ingram, who plays Reva, the brand new Inquisitor. That's right, this show is something else, and I'm so excited to be able to share it with each and every one of you. I was part of a very small, exclusive roundtable of Star Wars fan sites and podcasts. Besides myself, there's James Burns of Jedi News, Tricia Barr of Fangirl Blog, and from Skytalkers Pod, Charlotte Erriry and Caitlin Plesher. Wow, what a great group. So honored to be a part of these amazing fan sites. So without further ado, let's kick off this incredibly special show. Okay, so first on this incredible experience is Deborah Chow, the director of Obi-Wan Kenobi. All right, thank you. Good to see everybody, and thank you, Deborah, for your time. Absolutely. So question, bringing Obi-Wan to life was no easy task, with several challenges along the way. What was important for you to capture about this iconic character, and how did the journey to the series help prepare you?
It definitely was a challenging series, and in large part, obviously, because we're dealing with legacy characters and we're in between two trilogies. So there's quite a responsibility, to the characters and to the canon. And at the same time, obviously, we wanted to tell an original story. So I think, the starting place and the ending place for us was always character. Is that, this was a series about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I think the limited series format gives us a great opportunity to kind of get deeper and have more time with the character than if we'd done a feature or something. So we were just very excited to try to really get deeper into the character.
Hi, Deborah. Very nice to meet you. Following your exemplary work on The Mandalorian, coming to this series where you're working on your own, whereas the work on The Mandalorian is very collaborative. You're working with lots and lots of other different directors and things. So how was that process?
It was really different. Mandalorian, I think one of the things that was pretty amazing about that show was that team and was that collaborative effort. And I'd never had that experience. That's very unusual, I think, for directors to get to work so closely with each other. So that was a super cool experience. It was very different, obviously, coming onto Kenobi. But I was so thrilled, and honestly, I was so grateful to be able to do the whole thing, especially because it is one big show and one big story. Because there's something wonderful about just being able to see a vision through all the way from beginning to end and get to work with the actors on every nuance of character, knowing what you're building for the arc.
Hi, Deborah. Thanks so much for your time. I was wondering, previously you've referenced loving sci-fi and fantasy and just genre in general, and I was wondering what were some of your artistic influences that you brought into this series specifically?
I love genre, and I love, and for Star Wars, the galaxy is so detailed, and the world building is just so incredible in the galaxy. So I was really excited to kind of have a few new planets and get to expand on that world building. So we looked at a lot of references, and I worked pretty closely with Chung Hoon and also Doug Chang and Todd on the production design side. Say for something like Dayu, which is a planet that we do visit in this series. I was really looking at a lot of Wong Kar-wai. I was looking at In the Mood for Love, Chungking Express, Hong Kong Night Market, that sort of feel to it. And then some of the references that, just going into Tatooine and just in terms of telling the story. For me, I was looking at a lot of references to Westerns and samurais for Mandalorian. But if that was sort of more of a classic genre, a classic Western genre, I was looking a lot at things like The Proposition, Assassination of Jesse James, things that were a little bit more emotional and a little bit more sort of atmospheric for the series.
Deborah, thank you so much for your time.
My question was, you were recently quoted in Vanity Fair saying that across the saga films, there is a love story dynamic between Anakin and Obi-Wan. Is there a thin line between love and hate, though, when it comes to these two characters, knowing that now Anakin is defined by the dark side of the Force and Obi-Wan the light?
I definitely think there is. And I think, in terms of that, obviously, when we left Obi-Wan and Anakin, the last thing he said to him was, "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." So I think, we're dealing with a very intense relationship with the two of them, and they have a tremendous amount of history together. So I think, as in any human relationship, whether it's your brother or your mother or whoever it is, the capacity to hate so much is often driven by the fact that you care so much. So love and hate get so intertwined.
Hi. Part of Star Wars' success has been its timeliness in the stories that it's telling. So why is now the right time to tell the story of Obi-Wan Kenobi at this point in his life?
I think it's the right time for a number of reasons. I think, one of the biggest reasons is Ewan McGregor and where he is in his life and his age. For me, I think he feels like he's sort of the exact right age to play this character at this point in the timeline. He's still, he's got the wisdom, he's got the life experience, but he still has enough youth and vigor that, he still feels like he's connected to both sides of the trilogy. And I think for us, obviously we're between the two trilogies and there's a 20-year gap that starting in the middle felt like a very interesting place that kind of connects us on both sides.
So I'm going to jump in here really quick and share that I'm sure you've noticed first it's me that does these questions, and then James from Jedi News, and then we have Charlotte, and then Caitlin from Skytalkers, and then Tricia Barr from Fangirl Blog. All right, let's get back to this incredible interview. So from a storytelling perspective, how do you balance what we know about this character from the extensive Star Wars lore with a new and fresh approach to add a new chapter to his considerable story?
I would say that was definitely been the most challenging aspect of the project is, inheriting all the legacy aspect and wanting to really respect the canon and respect everything that's already been established. But at the same time, trying to tell that original story. But I think for us, and I think for particularly with Ewan and Hayden, one of the things that we were all the most interested in was that it was, we're telling a new story with these characters, but we're telling it at a different point in their lives. So they're not exactly the same people that they were obviously when they were younger or when they get older. So it was very interesting to kind of take on these characters, but at a different stage.
So we go back to some familiar places such as Tatooine and to the homestead. How difficult was it bringing those sort of locations to life and keeping the authenticity? Because there's millions of people around the world that know those scenes inside out.
Yeah, I think, one of the things when you go into production, and especially on something like this, is that every single detail matters so much. And, in the fan base, they know and they care so much. And that's kind of an amazing thing because, when you're creating it and trying to make it, everything matters. But it's also a lot to live up to, obviously. So, when we're recreating something like the homestead, there's extensive, we're doing extensive research and looking back at every reference to try to make sure that we have every single detail as correct as possible. And we're also going, okay, we're in between two, the time periods here. What would this have looked like 10 years earlier or whatnot? So one of the things I think that was tremendously helpful for us is that Doug Chang was very involved with us, and he's a co-production designer, and he obviously worked on the prequels, and he's done so much for Star Wars, so he was a tremendous resource.
What is your Star Wars defined by?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think Star Wars for me is about several things in sort of the big way, is that I feel like it's something that has always been connected to family, where it's like, I saw it for the first time with my family, and it feels like something you do with your family, so it's very intertwined with an experience of seeing it with your family. I think on another aspect of it, it's always felt like a very inclusive galaxy where, there's droids, there's creatures, there's people from all different planets. So it's always sort of felt like everybody could have a place in this galaxy, which I think is a really nice thing. And then I think just some of the eternal themes that Star Wars represents, hope, and especially, this series, like trying to maintain hope in dark times, just feel very universal.
New Star Wars projects often reveal a new side of the Force that audiences may not have seen before. Does Kenobi explore the Force or its influences over characters like Obi-Wan and Vader in any new ways?
It's interesting because obviously we're bringing the Inquisitors in, and they're coming into live action for the first time. So, we're using, and obviously a lot of it's been defined already, and, we're respecting everything that they've done. But that was an interesting way to kind of have a new aspect to it and have a new aspect and see Force wielders that we haven't seen before in live action.
We know that John Williams wrote Obi Kenobi's theme for the score. How did that come about? Did you reach out to him, or how did that happen?
We did reach out, and we were just extremely fortunate that, he had this small gap of time in which he could do it. So I'm tremendously grateful, and honestly, I honestly can't believe how fortunate we were that he was able to do it. But I think, at the end of the day, when we were looking at kind of a lot of the canon and the music, he was one of the only characters that John hadn't written a theme for. So we were so lucky that he was willing to do it.
So you had mentioned earlier when James asked a question about working on The Mandalorian, but there's obviously a collaborative effort when you're looking at The Mandalorian. And of course, with anything Star Wars related, when you're focusing on this one specifically, what new challenges did you go through as a filmmaker?
I think there were a few. Like, we obviously made this during COVID, so the entire thing was made through a pandemic, which was very tricky. A lot of our prep had to be remote. When we started shooting, there was no vaccine, so it was quite stressful in a lot of ways. So that was quite a challenge. And I think the difference with this one is that, the legacy aspect, and just these are incredibly iconic characters, and we are in the middle of a story. We're telling almost the second act of a story that everybody knows the beginning and the end of. So it can be daunting, and you want to respect that legacy, but at the same time, you also want to do something new with it. So I think those were the most challenging things.
Just a few days off, the first 2 episodes streaming on Disney Plus, and expectation amongst fans is, palpable. Everybody is sort of desperate to see these 2 episodes, and then we've got Star Wars Celebration as well, where tens of thousands of Star Wars fans are going to be converging. What do you want them to be talking about next Friday after those 2 episodes have dropped?
Hopefully about wanting to watch episode 3.
Okay.
I just hope, I think, with this series, the expectations obviously are very high. And I think, one of the biggest things that if we could connect with the audience where they could actually feel sort of an emotional connection and really feel connected to Obi-Wan as a character and really get on board with his journey, I think that's the thing that we're hoping for the most.
You were one of the first to work with the volume on The Mandalorian, and I wanted to know, how has that developed for you, and how was using it in this show specifically?
I loved, honestly, the technology, and getting to do that on Mandalorian, and also we were just the advent of that. It was so interesting to me, and I was so into it. So I was very excited to get to do that on Kenobi for this show. And one of the things that was really interesting is that a few years have passed, obviously, and things that we couldn't do on Mandalorian in first season, we could do by the time I came to Kenobi. So the technology is continually advancing. And the other thing I think for me that was really exciting was getting to actually develop the material, knowing that we're going to shoot it with stagecraft. So, you could already be starting to write the scenes or write the environments or think of the blocking with knowing what you're going to be doing in stagecraft.
You mentioned earlier the Inquisitors, and I was wondering if you could talk more about the process of developing characters for the Inquisitors into Kenobi.
So we, obviously 2 characters are coming, the Grand Inquisitor and Fifth are coming straight from Rebels and coming with, and then I worked with Dave pretty closely, obviously, on Mandalorian, so Dave was always sort of a touch point, as well as Doug Chang, so I'm fortunate at Lucasfilm that there are these people that you can always go to as a resource, which is great. And then for Reva, say someone, the character of Reva, who's played by Moses Ingram, I was very excited actually to have a young dark side female character, and to have a character that was new, that nobody would know actually what's going to happen or who she is. And that felt like a really exciting opportunity.
Speaking of Moses Ingram, you ended up with your prominent returning characters are white, and you really were able to round out the cast with a lot of actors of color. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think with this series, because we have so many legacy characters, and there is so much that is established. I felt like it was quite important that the show also have some elements that were original and that were new, whether it be characters or going to a new planet. So for me, I really wanted to kind of have a picture where that you felt that there was a lot of diversity in opinions, in characters, in droids, in everything just represented on screen.
So just as a fan, for you as a fan, how fun was it to see Hayden and Ewan reuniting, and just every time you'd see them interacting, whether it was behind the camera or whatever, that must have been electric for you.
It was incredibly special. It was really special. And I think, I'm sure, as you guys know, they have a personal relationship as well beyond professional. And so there really is like a really lovely emotional connection between the two of them. So not only do they share this history of doing the prequels and then also having lived with these characters and, in the public eye for so long, but also as people, they're connected to each other. So sort of having that come back together so many years later, it felt very special.
How is it seeing merchandise from characters and things that you've helped develop and create turn out? I mean, how exciting is that for you?
It's pretty cool. Whenever you get to see the action figures, like I'm still waiting to see a few of them on this one, but it is very cool, and it's another level. Like, when you're making the show, you're so busy that you're just trying to focus on kind of day by day with it, so you're not thinking about kind of the full picture of it. So it's exciting, actually, kind of going into this new stage of finally being able to take it out into the world.
You directed some of the best action sequences in The Mandalorian, and I was wondering, how was directing the action sequences in Obi-Wan Kenobi, and what can we expect?
Thank you. And I really actually love doing action, and it's something, that I never expected to, but, as I've kind of gone on with my career, I've really, really come to love it. So I think, one of the biggest differences is obviously we were mostly blasters in Mandalorian. So there was a lot of shootouts. There was a lot of Western shootouts going on. Whereas this one, we're more into Jedis, obviously. So now we're into lightsabers and a range of different sort of weapons. So it was really interesting getting to do action and design action with different weapons and different uses.
You mentioned new and old planets that we'll be seeing in the show Kenobi. Can you talk more about developing the aesthetic of a show that does take place between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope?
Developing the
aesthetic.
Oh, the aesthetic between the two. Yeah, I think, we've shown in the trailer, I think, the planet of Daiyu, and that was a really interesting planet where it's very different, obviously, than something like Tatooine. And that's something for me that I've always loved about Star Wars, is that you get to go to these new planets, you get to meet new characters, see new things. So I was excited about, going to some new planets. So say, for instance, with that planet, we looked, Chung-Hoon and I and Doug and Todd, we looked at a lot of references, and I was thinking a lot about like Wong Kar-wai, obviously, and things like that. And it's exciting getting to kind of develop an aesthetic that remains with the Star Wars vernacular, but also feels like something I haven't seen before.
We see in the trailer the shot with young Luke Skywalker, and I'd like to know how, like, as you grew up a fan, what's the emotions of filming something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just young Luke Skywalker. It's it was so much of this. It's like, I remember the first day, I walked onto the set of the Lars farm, and you're like, it's so iconic, and you're standing in front of it, and the first thing you're like, it's like, wow, it's a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be. I think because it just looms so large in your head that you think it's going to be this huge thing. So it was strange, and it was also like incredibly exciting, where it's like, you have an emotional relationship to all of these characters in these places. So it can feel very crazy sometimes to actually be directing it.
As you would expect, she was insightful and generous with her time. So that was terrific to be able to talk to such an important person who's responsible for the series. And she's just a true visionary and a really insightful, cool person. Up next, speaking of cool people, is Moses Ingram, who plays Reva, the new Inquisitor. She is a lot of fun. Now, the question order for all of us is the exact same as it was for Deborah Chow. Here we go. Well, it's wonderful to speak with you. Thank you so much. Question for you. So, how do the Inquisitors from Star Wars Rebels and the lore of Star Wars influence your performance?
Well, actually, it was really important for me to get to know it on its own outside of what was written. So yeah, mainly for me, my prep was really with the prequels and like the timeline that we were in and trying to figure out everything that I could about the space that we were about to attack.
We are really excited about your character and can't wait to see you on screen. Did you do a lot of research in terms of going back to the animated series to see how the Inquisitors were portrayed there?
No. I really just focused on the prequels in terms of, getting cozy in the timeline with where we were.
What motivates Reva and what is pushing her on her journey to Obi-Wan?
Well, it's her job as a subordinate of Darth Vader as a Jedi hunter, and we're here in this series with the Jedi, and so, she's gonna do her job to the best of her ability. She plays the offensive, and she's always 10 steps ahead.
In The Queen's Gambit, you played the best friend of a chess champion, but it seems like what we've seen so far that your character, Reva, might be playing some chess. Other than obviously playing with a lightsaber, what else did you enjoy about playing Reva?
It was great because every day was different. Obviously you read what you have coming in the next day, but sometimes it's even more fun to see, which ways we might have to redo a thing to make it work better or undo a thing to change things. I feel like it's always just this moving wheel that you really got to be on your A game to stay on.
So I'd love to hear your description of when you first walked on the set and they handed you your lightsaber prop, and then seeing yourself on screen in full costume for the first time with your special effects added to that legendary weapon.
Yeah, it's really crazy. So it actually happens in parts. So in the gym, you have to train with your weapons and things. And so as it was in process, Brad, our props master, would come in and, sort of shape it to my hands as we would go along. And so he'd come in with like this black box and open it up, and there would be my piece, which was like always really exciting for me. And that first day that we're on set, it's in the trailer where we're like coming off of the ship and into this big hole in the ground. And it's just so surreal. And I think that's also the first time that, because we play in rehearsal with dummy ones too, so I had never had it lit when we were rehearsing. But seeing it lit the first time in front of you, like in action, is crazy. It's really crazy.
When you were on BBC One show last week, you started to talk about some of the learning some of the fight scenes and some of the training that you went through. And I wondered if you could just talk to us about that, because it was quite an ordeal to do all of that training.
It was actually. I was a full-on athlete during the shooting of this project. And, 5 days a week of your regular, like, running and strength training, and then Jedi school on top of that, which is, like, a lot of core strength, and then implementing all of the training and agility with your stunt training. But it was also, even though it was intense, it was really fun because I'd be in the room with Ewan, or Hayden would be in the room, and we'd be on different sides of the room. But you just get inspired by how hard people are working. You want to rise to the occasion. And so it was hard, but certainly worth it.
I was wondering if you could talk about the costume of Reva. What was it like putting it on? How did you feel in it?
That was also another really surreal moment. I actually got a little misty putting it on. I felt like the little kid in me was just elated to be in this really slick suit. Our costume designer, Sudarat, did an amazing job building this costume that does a lot of the work for you. You step into it and it doesn't allow you to slouch. It just holds you up and holds you together, and it's very grand and surreal, sick. Yeah.
You're coming into a show where two of the actors have a long relationship. together, and in Star Wars in particular. What did you learn from Ewan and Hayden on this show?
You know, they really do lead by example. So many people love them and have personal memories with them that they don't even know about, and they're so gracious every time. I think on this press tour, that's one of the things that's been really rewarding for me to see is people seeing Ewan and Hayden together on the street and just stopping in their tracks, sometimes crying, laughing themselves to tears even. It brings a lot of people a lot of joy, and I think that's probably been the best part from the outside.
And so now you're going to get that kind of reactions when you're out. So I would love to know, what do your family and friends think about you being a part of this huge galaxy?
It's funny because so when the initial announcement came out, there was, of course, excitement and joy. Oh, my God, you're going to be in Star Wars. And as we started the press tour, I've actually had more friends be like, I didn't know you were in Star Wars. I thought you were just, like, in it. I didn't realize you were, like, in it. I'm like, yeah, I'm actually in it. So that's really funny. So it's like another wave of excitement now that they're like, I mean, I thought, you'd be there for like a couple seconds, but, yeah.
I think it's amazing to hear those reactions and things. Yeah. What was your grounding in Star Wars? What did you know about Star Wars before you came into this project? Were you a fan?
Well, I knew, in pop culture, this like Darth Vader is the villain and Obi-Wan is like the archetypal hero. And then, of course, I had a lightsaber like most kids do. And, I think I was more blessed, though, to discover Star Wars via being cast than to have seen the movies when I was a kid coming up. Because now it's tied to so many personal memories and moments for me and people for me in a way that I appreciate more. I think in some ways it would have been harder having loved Star Wars so much at the top, to like focus and like work without pressure at the beginning. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
What 3 words would you use to describe Reva?
I'm gonna try to use 3 I haven't used yet. Deadly. Ooh, part of me wants to say Slytherin, but maybe that's not a good one. But I'll say deadly and offensive and present.
I read that you had some input into the design of Reva's hair. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, the original hair design, it was just something that my hair doesn't do on its own. It would have taken a lot of work to make my hair do what we wanted originally. And Deborah Chow, our director, bless her, was really welcoming in having me be a part of the process of developing who Reva would be. And so it was really important for me that when kids with hair like mine, potentially want to be me for Halloween, they can wear their own hair and not have to don a wig because I donned a wig. You know what I mean? So that was really important to me. That's how we ended up with the braids.
For the physicality of this role, more specifically, of course, the fight sequences and the lightsaber training, how challenging was that? I must admit, it's one thing to play when you're a kid, like we've all done, but when you're doing it and you're going to face off against Ewan McGregor and Hayden, and you've got that going for you, what was that like?
It's tough. You know what I mean? That first day in particular, Ewan and I were in training, and he picks up the lightsaber, and of course he's been doing this for years, and so he's just whipping it and twirling it like it's not anything, and I'm having trouble just keeping it in my hand for certain simple twirls, you know what I mean? And then there are the other things, different details of why my character can't spin it a certain way, and so even though something might be easier, it's like storyline wise too, there are things that you have to consider in learning the lightsaber as well. And so if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. But once you get it, you feel really confident at it, or I did at least.
How was it working on the volume using the stagecraft technology? Because I'm assuming that you'd never experienced that way of working before.
No, I hadn't. The scale of this project is definitely something I'd never experienced. It's funny listening in comparison to Ewan and Hayden talk about it. You know, we'll be on set and they'll be like, wow, this is really something. We were acting with tennis balls and blue screens, and this is just, it's different for you, Moses. You know, which I'm really grateful for. I didn't have to do much pretending. You step into the volume and it really is hyper realistic. So wherever the machine shows you are, you feel like you are in that place, and they make the floors match as well. It's pretty crazy.
So what was it like to be on the dark side team with Darth Vader himself?
Pretty sick. Yeah, I mean, like I said, like, he's the villain. Even when we were doing our Vanity Fair shoot, standing next to, you know, Vader is like large, very large, you know what I mean? And so it's pretty crazy. Pretty surreal is the best word. Yeah, surreal.
When you think about this character and the impact that she's going to have, what do you hope people take away from Reva?
What do I hope people take away from Reva? You know, I mean, I hope they enjoy the overall story, I guess. You know, and how it all plays together as a unit. I mean, it's super dope it's super fun for me to be the villain, and I hope they're able to feel in it the fun that we had making it.
So when you've done all your work and it's time for whatever you're making, whether it's Obi-Wan Kenobi or something else, how do you watch it for the first time? Or are you an actor who doesn't watch their work?
I don't watch. I don't watch. If I have to watch it with an audience, I'll watch with the audience because it feels like the respectful thing to do a lot of times with premieres. But aside from that, I don't. Yeah.
Have you had an opportunity yet to see yourself immortalized as a 3 3/4 inch or a 6-inch action figure?
I have. And it is crazy. It has my dimensions, which is even wilder to me. It's like, it's me, but like in miniature form. And it has my face. It's so crazy. Yeah, it makes me giddy still.
So what was it like to work with Deborah Chow?
Deborah Chow is amazing. And she really does and did work around the clock to make this amazing for the people who love it so much. And she doesn't complain. And so welcoming to everyone into this with her in building. You know, she's just so free of ego and unthreatened by anyone. And, you know, energy on set works top down. And I think it was so cool because Deborah is so cool. So cool.
Every production has a challenge and every actor has a challenge. What was your challenge on this show, Kenobi?
If I had to call something challenging, I would say it would have to be the level of athleticism that was required for this. But it's really... It wasn't like off-putting in any way. It was still so fun to be a part of and to do every day, and to challenge our bodies in that way was really dope as well.
And now, my friends, Coffee with Kenobi sits down and talks with Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor. Let's do this. A pleasure to meet you, sir. My name is Dan Zare from Coffee with Kenobi.
How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. So naturally, Deborah Chow, the script, and your history with Obi-Wan are essential to your performance. But for you as an actor, What steps did you take to inhabit the legendary Jedi Knight from an emotional and spiritual perspective?
I feel that kind of thing is all to do with the writing, you know? We took a character that we know and love from Alec Guinness in the original movie in the 70s through the work that I did in episode 1 to 3, you know, knowing the character from his early days as a Padawan to being on the Jedi Council with Yoda and the other Jedi Council members, to then becoming this wise, solitary, sage-like spiritual man. And we sort of took him into a very different place. At the beginning of the series, we know what's happened at the end of episode 3. He's lost all of his friends, and those who weren't killed in Order 66 are in hiding in the far corners of the galaxy, and they're not able to communicate with one another. So we took him to sort of he's also crushed with the guilt that he feels about losing Anakin to the dark side. And so we took him to a very dark, broken place, a man who's lost his faith, I guess it's true to say. I don't know how you do that. Like, I don't think about it. I don't analyze I don't have a method to do that, but I just did that. I don't know. I don't question it too much, acting. I don't have a method to it other than putting myself in the person's shoes that I understand and trying to find the truth of any given moment. And that's what we did with me and Deborah and the rest of the crew.
My question is, since Revenge of the Sith, you've done 35, 40 films, and why now? Why this particular moment to come back to this iconic character?
I think it's a combination of lots of things. I don't think it would have happened had I not had a sense of the fondness that there is for the prequels with the generation of people we made them for. You know, the people who were young people when they came out. The noise that we had, the sort of feedback that we had when they came out was that they weren't not liked. And that's because we could only really hear the critics. There was no social media. There wasn't the same sort of avenue for hearing the voice of the audience. And also the audience were children. So, but lately in the last 5 years or so, I've started having a real sense of the fondness that there is for the prequels from the people we made them for. And that's felt really, really good. And I also could, at the same time, could feel this huge desire for as there were spin-off movies being made about Han Solo and other characters, I could feel that there was a real desire to have an Obi-Wan Kenobi spin-off, whatever it be, a movie or in this case, a TV series. So I think the combination of those two things happening at the same time lead us to be where we are right now.
Hey, Ewan, my name is Caitlin Plesher from Skytalkers Podcast. Firstly, as someone from the prequel generation, thank you so much. We're so excited to see Obi-Wan back again.
Oh, cool. Great. Good. Thank you.
My first question was, you just spoke about how Obi-Wan is a broken man at the start of the show and has lost his faith and is at his lowest point. At the point when we meet him in the show, what does Obi-Wan believe in? Does he still have hope for the future?
I think it's difficult to say exactly. And in a way, you'll have to be the judge of that. Because for me, playing him, I felt different things about it at different times. The one thing I can tell you is that he has one responsibility left to his old life as a Jedi, and that is looking over Luke Skywalker. And you could argue that's because he feels like Luke Skywalker would need to be trained. If he shows signs of the Force, if he's Force sensitive, then he should train him to be a Jedi. But at the same time, at least cerebrally, I guess, he feels like the Jedi Order is over. So there's a sort of contradiction there. And I don't know exactly how it's going to feel. I just know when I played it, I felt both of those things, that there is still hope in Obi-Wan Kenobi because he still has this desire to protect Luke Skywalker. And that could just be because he promised Padme that he would, and he feels a responsibility to that. But also I feel like there's a sense in some of the dialogue with Owen that Owen certainly feels it's because Obi-Wan wants to train Luke Skywalker. And so we'll see. You'll have to see. I've already given away too much.
Hi, I'm Tricia Barr from Fangirl Blog. Again, loved the prequel trilogy, so thank you. We're expressing our gratitude. You said in recent interviews that you had trouble getting the Obi-Wan voice coming back to it. So what is the difference between Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice and Ewan McGregor's voice?
Well, I'm Scottish, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is not Scottish. So he is an English voice, and but more than that, he's Alec Guinness's voice, you know. And I never tried to do like an impersonation of Alec Guinness, but I always wanted it to sound like that I become him, you know, that in the years to come, I am Alec Guinness, because that was my job in the prequels, was to be the young Alec Guinness. So there's a certain kind of phrasing and a sound to rhythms and a sound to the way he delivers his lines in A New Hope that I always try and sort of nod my hat at, or tip my hat at or something. But I mean, I didn't have a problem getting his voice back by the time we started shooting the series, because I'd done my homework before we started shooting the series. But we did a casting session with one of the other characters months before we started shooting, and at that I hadn't put in any work in yet. I had to go away and remind myself. I had to listen to lots of Alec Guinness interviews and watched, and I had a sound file made of just his dialogue from the 3 Star Wars films that he was in, and I just had to remind myself of that, because it's just a particular. It's not just an English accent, you know. What I was doing in that casting session was just a sort of general English accent, and it just didn't sound very Obi-Wan Kenobi-esque to me.
Thank you. I still think it's surreal that Coffee with Kenobi's talking to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Love that. So you talked about getting back with your voice and doing the research, because that's your pro. That's what you do. But physically, getting back into Jedi training shape, you're in good shape already. But wielding a lightsaber is not an everyday occurrence. At least well, for my 8-year-old it is, but not for me. So what was that like to get back athletically into lightsaber shape?
Well, we did a lot of fight training with Jojo, a brilliant fight coordinator. Part of that was like lightsaber drills, because I was working with Moses, and but Obi-Wan isn't using the Force at the beginning of the series, so he's also not using his lightsaber, and so we'll have to see. All I know is that I got really fit for it. I know that there was a lot of action in the series, and that involves an enormous amount of energy when you're shooting a sequence, maybe all day long of, you know, fight, whether it be a lightsaber fight or another kind of fight. That can be a sort of, you need a bit of endurance there, a bit of stamina. So I made sure that I was as fit as I'd ever been, really. I was always also, you know, 20 years older than I was almost when I did it last. So I just got in really good shape for it.
I'm assuming this was your first time shooting on the volume using stagecraft. So can you explain a little bit how different that was to filming the prequels, which was obviously a lot of green screen and blue screen, and here you're completely immersed in your environment?
Yeah, it was very different. I mean, it's exactly as you described. You've sort of answered your own question. We weren't in front of blue screens and green screens. We were surrounded by the actual environment that we were supposed to be in. And the technology is unbelievable, and it's really a game changer for us. It's you know, in episode 2, I spent weeks walking around in front of a blue curtain, acting to a tennis ball on a stick when I was with those alien people who were making the clone armies. I mean, I just was on my own in a blue set for days and days and days, speaking into thin air. So it's a hard it's hard to do that in the new stagecraft set, the volume. You know, you can look anywhere, up, round, anywhere. You see the desert. If you're in the desert, you see the desert going off into the distance. You know, they can put digital extras into the background. They can have spacecraft land. You can see them come in and land. You know, it's like being there, and that makes it's just like night and day. I mean, I understand why it happened. Like George Lucas was at the forefront of a new technology. He was pioneering digital cameras, and he was pioneering visual effects, the creation of ILM, and the way that we make visual effects nowadays was at the forefront. He was at the forefront of that then, and so of course, as somebody who is doing that work, he's going to want to exercise that technology as much as he can, and that was his right to do so. And it also gave the prequels their look, and you know, he was able to sort of world build in a way, the only way that we could then. And but for us, that meant more and more blue screen and less and less sets. And it's just unfortunate for the actors, because it's not an easy way to work. But I get it totally.
Hi, Ewan. I'm Charlotte Erriry from Skytalkers.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you, what was it like working with Deborah Chow and seeing her vision for Star Wars, and how does that compare to working with George Lucas?
Well, you don't compare directors. I wouldn't. I mean, they're so different from one another anyway. Every director you work with on a new piece of work is a totally unique experience. And directors' work is so much about personality and taste, and the artistry of the director is very, very difficult to put your finger on. So you don't really compare them. George, like I said, George was working as a director, but he produced a series. He created the world that we worked in, and he was at the forefront of ILM and digital cameras, and the creation of his Dolby sound. I mean, he was doing an enormous of many things, and also he was our director for those first 3 films, you know, and he made the films he wanted to make. He took them in a different direction from the original movies of the 70s, because he felt like he wanted to make them in a different way, tell slightly different story. And then with this, Deborah came on board, and she worked so well with the writers, but she took the writing in all different directions, so we really honed in on the story that we wanted to tell. But she's a brilliant director on set. You could see that the crew work really like raised to their A game for her. And she's a very quiet, powerful director. She's very good with the actors. She was very good, you know, with younger actors. She was amazing in terms of getting performances out of them. And she worked really well with all the heads of department. And there's a lot of people involved, you know. And the planning that goes into shooting something on the volume, you can't just... The volume has to be like loaded. Every background has to be loaded onto that. It takes a long time. You can't just, you know, switch it around like a flick of a switch. So the planning that had to go into what we shot on the volume, what we shot on location, what was going to, you know, was really intricate. And she did an amazing job at that. And we finished on the day we were supposed to finish. There was we never shot on the weekends. We finished work at a reasonable hour. It was really a proficient job all round. But mainly, I would say that her strength is that she has her vision, and her vision goes through every episode of this. And I'd be happy to work with her again on anything.
Obviously, we saw Obi-Wan in films, but this story is told in a television series. What's the advantage of doing this story in that format?
I think it lends itself to the sort of episodic nature, although we are telling us one narrative. Like it's episodic in the way The Mandalorian is a bit more, each episode is a little bit more standalone in The Mandalorian, although there is a driving story from the first to the last episode. Ours is I feel like it's like a long movie, which is broken into the episodes in the appropriate places. It felt like we made a long movie. That's all. It just didn't feel any different to me. We certainly, this new technology I haven't worked on before anyway, so it's not like I've got anything to compare it to, but it felt to me like we approached it as a movie, like one story, and we shot it that way. And the technology helped us to do that. But I think it's very satisfying to have longer. It's nice to have, 6 hours to tell this story as opposed to, an hour and 20 minutes.
Clearly, Star Wars is not something new for you as an actor, but there are a lot of new actors in this, a lot of new members of the crew that have not worked on Star Wars before. But you have a new role, that is an executive producer. What was that like in bringing that to the table for this production?
I was just involved from the very beginning. I came at it because Disney asked me to come in, because I was always asked at the end of all my interviews whether I would, for years, would I make a sequel to Trainspotting, and would I ever play Obi-Wan Kenobi again? It was like guaranteed the last two questions of any interview. When the publicist comes in and says, that's enough, you have to wrap up, last question, that would be my last two questions. And so I just started answering honestly, and I felt the sort of, like I'm saying, the warmth of the people who loved the sequels, and I just started thinking there must be this story that would sit between episode 3 and 4, a good story in there. And so they called me in, and I'm starting to think I've told you this already. Did I? Okay. So Disney they called me in and they said, look, we keep reading that you say you'd play this role again. Do you mean it? And I said, yeah, I do mean it. I think it would be good. I think there must be a good story between 3 and 4. And so we started talking then. It was with Kiri, who was working at Lucasfilm at the time. And we started talking about what it could be. And that the Star Wars world was so big, and that it expanded into all these different directions, that it could be any kind of story. It could be a small character-driven story. And all I had in my head at the time is to have a broken Obi-Wan Kenobi, like a man who's living in a bleak life. Like, he's lost his faith, he's lost his best friend, he's lost all his everyone he knew and loved is gone, either in hiding or dead, and that he's trying, and he's not able to live as a Jedi anymore. He can't. So I just thought that was an interesting place to start, and that's where we started talking about it. And then it went through lots of iterations. It was a movie. Stephen Daldry was going to direct it at one point, and we did some work, Stephen and I, and we met in New York for a weekend with a writer and a producer and some people from Lucas World, and we sort of brainstormed ideas for 2 days over one weekend, and it was just interesting to talk about different storylines, potential storylines, and how I felt about them as the person who was going to play them, and sort of talking about Obi-Wan from the inside, if you like. And then it went to Deborah's hands, and because Stephen had a conflict he had another franchise he was directing, and our dates suddenly, because of delays or whatever, anyway, he couldn't do it in the end. And Deborah had directed a couple of episodes of The Mandalorian, and Kathleen Kennedy really liked her, and I met her and I really liked her, and it was just brilliant. From then on, she took over. She did amazing work with the writers. The storyline sort of shifted quite dramatically from one storyline to another at one point, and I feel like that was a bit of a breakthrough. And now she just drove it through. So, but all of this time, I wasn't working with I wasn't in the room with the writers, but Deb was, and I would just read every version of the scripts as they came through, and they just kept getting better and better, I was just involved in that way. I wasn't heavily involved, but it was nice to be involved from start to finish.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
there you have it. My goodness. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor, Deborah Chow, and Moses Ingram on Coffee with Kenobi. What an incredible thrill. Look, I've been very blessed, very fortunate to do a lot of cool things with Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Z Media. But this is up there as one of the most special things I've ever been a part of. I don't think I've ever been as nervous for an interview talking on the show since I talked to James Arnold Taylor the very first time that I talked to him. So that was spectacular. And guess what, everybody? There is more to come. That's right. There's going to be more to come. Stay tuned. I want to thank my peers, James Burns, Tricia Barr, and Charlotte and Caitlin from Skytalkers Podcast. What a thrill to be able to do this with each of them. Thank you so much for joining me. See, I'm tongue-tied because I can't even listening to it now. It just blows me away. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly special episode of Coffee with Kenobi. So much more to come. Enjoy the rest of your week and weekend, and I will see you very, very soon with more Obi-Wan Kenobi coverage, as well as Star Wars Celebration. Thanks again, everybody, and remember, this is a podcast you're looking for. Oh, by the way, I should probably say, hey, thank you to Deborah, Moses, and Ewan McGregor for joining me on Coffee with Kenobi.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along. Move along.